The night I stood in my mother's living room and placed the first document on the coffee table, the only sound in that house was the paper hitting the wood. 14 people in that room, and not one of them breathed. Renee sat across from me in the chair with the good armrests. The chair positioned where the afternoon light fell just right. The chair she had claimed as hers in a house that was not yet legally, ethically, or spiritually hers. And as I set down the second document, and then the third, I watched the color drain from her face the way water drains from a basin. Slow. Inevitable. Leaving nothing behind. She had told me, 20 years earlier, at my own engagement dinner, that I would always be second. She said it the way you state the weather, like a condition I should prepare for. If you have ever stood in a room full of family and watched the architecture of a lie begin to collapse, you know the particular silence I am describing. It is not the silence of shock. It is the silence of recognition. 20 years of it arriving all at once. A whole room of people understanding simultaneously that what they had been told and what had actually happened were two entirely different things. I want you to know what it took to build that moment. I want you to know what it cost. And I want you to know why, at 54 years old, I am still here to tell it. If this story sounds like something someone you love is living right now, please share it before you keep listening. Someone is sitting alone with the truth of what has been done to them, and they need to hear that walking into the room is possible. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. It was a Tuesday night in Oakland, California, in the middle of a summer so thick you could wear it. 2:14 in the morning, and I could not sleep. The refrigerator needed cleaning. I am the kind of woman who, when sleep does not come, goes looking for something useful to do with her hands. My apartment is on the 4th floor of an old brick building with a fire escape on the east side of Oakland, in that neighborhood where nothing quite decided what it wanted to be, where a glass tower catches the moonlight 2 blocks from a corner store that has been here since before I was born. That gentrifying edge where old buildings meet new condos, where the past and the future lean against each other without ever reaching an agreement. Summer heat does not leave at night in Oakland. It settles in. The fan spins all day and into the dark hours, pushing warm air from one side of the room to the other, and you are grateful anyway because at least the air is moving. I had on my golden mustard sweater pulled over my nightgown, the one that always makes me think of October even in July, because this building's air conditioning works on a schedule it does not share with tenants. I moved the sweet tea in its plastic pitcher from the middle shelf to the counter and poured myself a glass. And the kitchen light threw long shadows across the linoleum, and the city outside made its low, continuous sound. Traffic on MacArthur, someone's television 2 floors down, a bus somewhere on Broadway breathing out its hydraulic sigh. On the windowsill, the church fan with Martin Luther King's face on it caught the streetlight from outside. My mother pressed it into my palm the last Sunday before she passed, said it would keep me cool in body and steady in mind, which is the kind of thing my mother said, the kind of thing that sounds like a gift and turns out to be exactly that. I keep it close. It has been on every windowsill I have lived at since she died. On the kitchen table, my plastic pill organizer with the days of the week sat open. Tuesday still full. I had forgotten again. I took the pills with my sweet tea and stood at the window, and the quilt stretched across the back of my sofa caught my eye. The one I started for my youngest grandchild, 8 years old, loves dinosaurs. I have been quilting blankets for each grandchild since the first one arrived 12 years ago. Each square is cut from something that meant something. One of those squares, tucked in the lower left corner of the dinosaur quilt, came from the dress I wore to my engagement dinner 23 years ago. The $340 dinner I had saved for carefully. The night with the white tablecloth and the candles, and the man I believed in, and the family I believed would celebrate alongside me. The night my sister Renee tilted her head and smiled and said, quietly enough that only I could hear, You'll always be second. I was 31 years old. I laughed. I thought she was being Renee. Sharp, competitive. The older sister who had never quite decided whether I was a companion or a rival. I thought it was a small cruelty with no architecture behind it. Standing at my kitchen window 23 years later, holding a glass of sweet tea I could not taste, I finally understood what she had been announcing, and something in my chest went quiet in a way that felt less like peace and more like the moment before a storm decides to move. I did not know yet what I would find, but I could feel, in the way your body knows things before your mind catches up, that something had been arranged around me for a very long time. And that Tuesday night, at 2:14 in the morning in Oakland, in the summer heat and the silence, was the night I started looking. To understand what happened to me, you first have to understand the role I had been assigned in my family, and how completely I had accepted it. Not weakness. I want to be precise about this because weak is the word they counted on me not to examine too closely. I worked 31 years as an administrative coordinator for the county school district. I raised 2 daughters largely alone after my marriage ended, managed a household, paid my bills, showed up for every school event and church program and family gathering that required showing up. I was capable, organized, dependable. But inside the architecture of my mother's family, I had been positioned so early I could not see the edges of the position from the inside. The dependable one, the one who stayed, the one who absorbed disappointment without converting it into someone else's problem. I bet you know someone like that. I bet you might be that person right now, and I believed. I need you to understand the full weight of this belief, because everything I am about to tell you depends on it. That more effort was the answer to every coldness, every exclusion, every dinner where I sat at the far end of the table trying to earn warmth that had already been decided I would not receive. I thought if I gave more, complained less, proved myself more thoroughly, the ledger would eventually tip in my favor. Love, in the version I had been handed, was something you earned through sacrifice. You paid in, and eventually the family recognized the investment. This is what no one tells you about that belief while you're inside it. It does not feel like a flaw. It feels like virtue. It feels like the kind of character that deserves reward. It is only from the other side that you understand you were not earning love. You were providing cover. My mother's house on Magnolia Street was a solid gray Craftsman 3 blocks from Lake Merritt. She had lived there for 38 years, and that house was her life's accomplishment. The thing she pointed to when she needed proof that she had built something that would outlast her. She spoke about it directly in her last years. She said my name and that house in the same sentence more times than I can count. Said it in the kitchen while I helped with her medications. Said it on the phone. Said it in front of Renee with no ambiguity whatsoever. She wanted me to have it. Her property, her heirlooms, her pearl earrings she wore every Christmas Sunday, the quilt frame she had brought from Alabama, all of it meant for me. She said so. What Renee and my cousin Gerald and my Aunt Bai had decided, together, in coordination, over time, was that my mother's wishes would be revised to reflect their preferences instead. Renee would claim the house, Gerald would manage the paperwork, Aunt Bea would provide the testimony. Yes, Mama had changed her mind. Yes, it was always really meant for Renee. You know how she felt. This arrangement had been running quietly beneath the surface of every family gathering for longer than I knew. In 2009, when Renee came to me with soft eyes and a carefully measured voice and said she was going to lose her home if she did not get $14,000 in 10 days, I wired the money. No contract, no promissory note. Family trust, I told myself, does not require signatures. I remember the exact sensation of pressing the button to send, not hesitation, which is what a healthy person would feel, but the specific warmth of someone who believes she is finally doing enough. That money was everything I had in savings at that moment. It took me 3 years to rebuild it. $14,000 transferred on good faith into someone's income and net worth, never acknowledged. And I thought, you may be sitting wherever you are right now thinking why, and I want to give you the honest answer. I thought that money was a down payment on being finally seen. I had been paying in increments my whole adult life, and I believed $14,000 was the amount that would tip the scale. That is what that belief does to a person over decades. It converts sacrifice into strategy and then never tells you the strategy will not pay out. The quilting got smaller during those years. Those hours at my kitchen table, my hands moving through the squares, the smell of old fabric and the precise small task of lining up edges. That was the only time I felt like no one wanted anything from me. But I gave even that away in small pieces, because there was always something more urgent. Renee's emergency, Gerald's favor, Aunt Bee's request. The church fan stayed on my windowsill and I held it in the dark and asked my mother what she would tell me to do. She always answered in the words she had actually spoken to me when she was alive. She said, "Baby, they will take what you offer and go looking for more." I kept hearing her and kept not applying it to her own children. The first thing that did not add up was a phone call. October, the year after my mother passed. Gerald called, asking whether I had retained copies of anything she had given me regarding the estate. His voice was too careful, too rehearsed in its casualness. I told him I had some papers and would look through them. He said, "No rush," in a tone that meant the opposite. And we hung up, and I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and feeling the first real chill of something I could not yet name. I told myself I was being oversensitive. I set the feeling aside. I poured more sweet tea and watched the fan on the windowsill sit still in the summer end air. But feelings like that, in my experience, do not disappear because you ignore them. They just get more patient. It was a Tuesday in March, 11:47 in the morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table eating leftover rice when my phone made the email sound. I picked it up, expecting nothing. What I saw was Renee's name in the sender field and a subject line that read, "FW, Final Docs Check, B's Sign-Off." She had meant to forward it to Gerald. She sent it to me instead. I sat very still for a moment. Then I opened it. The email chain was 17 messages long, dating back 4 years. I read from the bottom up, the way you have to read a forwarded chain, watching the story construct itself in reverse. By the 5th message, my rice had gone cold. By the 10th, I had both hands flat on the table because I needed to feel something solid underneath me. By the 17th, the earliest message, sent by Renee to Gerald 3 months after our mother's funeral, I understood everything. They had manufactured a letter, a document supposedly written and signed by my mother, authorizing the estate transfer, had been created 6 weeks after she died. 6 weeks. The creation date was embedded in the file metadata, visible to anyone who thought to look. They had apparently not considered that anyone would look. They had been right about that for 4 years. In the chain was a scanned copy of the letter. My mother's signature at the bottom, or something approximating it. I had watched my mother sign her name hundreds of times. The looping R of Rosetta, the particular pressure on the downstroke, the way she always lifted the pen slightly before the final curve. What was on that page was a careful approximation, close enough to pass a probate clerk, not close enough to pass her daughter, and in message 7, written by Renee to Gerald with the ease of someone who had never once considered she might be caught. "She'll sign whatever we put in front of her. She always does." I read that sentence 5 times. I want you to sit with those 11 words for a moment, because I need you to understand what they do to a person. I had wired money and signed documents and absorbed exclusion, and kept warmth running through every cold season of that family's life, and here it was in writing, not a description of my virtue, not an acknowledgement of my generosity, but a calculation. I was a mechanism A thing that stayed in place while other people made decisions about my mother's property, my mother's heirlooms, my inheritance, my life. I put the phone face down on the table. I picked up my plastic pill organizer with the days of the week and held it in both hands. Tuesday. I had taken my pills that morning with coffee. I had not forgotten. My name was written on the lid in permanent marker, the name I had put there myself because 2 of my grandchildren also take medication, and I did not want them mixed up. I held that case and looked at my name and breathed. My name. Still there. Then I went to the bathroom and I looked in the mirror. I do not know how long I stood there. I was looking at a 54-year-old woman in Oakland who had given away $14. Dollars and her mother's property and her mother's pearl earrings and the quilt frame from Alabama and 20 years of careful, quiet accommodation. The woman in that mirror had lines on her forehead she had attributed to aging, a tiredness around her eyes she had called insomnia, a tightness across her shoulders she had named the ordinary weight of being 54. Standing there, I understood for the first time that the tiredness was not simply time. The lines were not just years. They were the accumulated cost of being arranged, of being maintained in usefulness by her own good faith. And here is the other thing I saw, the infrastructure. The woman in that mirror had fed them, had housed them emotionally, financially, spiritually, had kept the warmth of the family running through every winter of their coldness. She had been the thing that held while other people took. And the thing that holds, when it finally sees itself clearly, does not break. It decides. I sat on the bathroom floor until the light through the window changed from morning to afternoon. Then I got up, washed my face, and walked back to my kitchen table. I forwarded myself every message in the chain. I took screenshots of every page. I emailed them to a secondary account I had never given anyone in my family. I downloaded the attachment with the forged letter. Then I made tea and read the whole thing again, slowly, writing notes on a yellow legal pad. They had made one catastrophic miscalculation. They had been counting on my silence. That was the last thing they would ever be able to count on. 3 days after I found the email chain, I had not told a single person. I want you to understand what that silence feels like from the inside, because it is not peace. It is the pressure of holding something very large in a very small space. The knowledge that the people you loved most have been building a false version of you in their private communications, and that the whole world around you is operating on their version while you sit alone with the real one. I went to work. I came home. I made dinner. I took my pills. I stood at the window in the late summer heat and breathed through it and did not pick up the phone. On the Thursday after, my neighbor Claudette knocked on my door. Claudette has lived 3 doors down from me in this building for 11 years. She is 67, a retired schoolteacher, a woman who maintains a small garden on the building roof, and holds opinions she shares without apology. She had known me through the years of my mother's illness and the years that followed, had watched me come and go from family obligations that visibly wore me down. She had never pushed for explanations I was not offering, but she was the kind of neighbor who noticed things, who would knock because she had made too much soup, or because she had seen your kitchen light on at an unusual hour for 3 nights in a row. She knocked because she had seen my light on for 3 nights straight. She had made biscuits. I let her in. She sat at my kitchen table. I do not know exactly what she saw in my face that morning, but whatever it was, she put down the biscuits and waited. She did not ask anything. She just waited, with the particular patience of a woman who taught children for 30 years and understands that some truths need a moment to find their way out. I showed her the email chain. She read every message slowly, absorbing each word before forming a judgment. When she finished, she closed the phone screen and laid it flat on the table between us and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Write everything down before you do anything else." 7 words. That was all. But I want you to understand why those 7 words landed the way that no advice I had given myself in 3 sleepless days of silence had landed. Claudette had no stake in the outcome. She was not invested in my forgiveness or my continued usefulness to Renee or the family's ability to function as it always had. She looked at what they had done and named it without hedging, without the softening that people who love you sometimes apply because they are afraid the truth will hurt you more than the lie. She said, "Write it down," which meant, "You are not crazy," which meant, "This is real," which meant, "You are a witness to something that happened, and witnesses keep records." I cried in front of her for about 4 minutes. Then I washed my face, and we ate her biscuits, and she stayed for 2 hours helping me organize my thoughts about where to begin. Here is what I had in my favor. I am a woman who has kept records her entire adult life. Bank statements going back 15 years. A journal maintained since my daughters were small. Receipts and correspondence stored without fully knowing why. Some instinct of a woman who understood, even without articulating it, that the official version of events might not always match her experience. The $14,000 wire transfer was in my files with the exact date, the amount, and the receiving account name. The estate documents I had signed were in a shoebox in my closet. Voicemails I had never deleted, including one from Gerald asking about documents from Mama in that careful, rehearsed voice. 3 days after Claudette's visit, she connected me to a legal aid attorney named Priscilla who worked out of an office in Fruitvale. I sent Priscilla the email chain. She called back within 2 hours, 14 minutes. At the end of the call, she said, "This is enough to open a probate inquiry. But I need everything you have. Every piece of paper, every date, every transaction you can document." The record grew to 43 pages by the end of that summer. Bank statements cross-referenced with my journal. Emails printed and labeled with timestamps. Scanned copies of the estate documents I had signed, noted against county recorder records Priscilla helped me request. 3 inches thick in a manila envelope I carried everywhere. To work, to the grocery store on Telegraph Avenue, to Sunday service, because I was not willing to risk it going anywhere I could not see. The thing about building a record is that it changes you as you do it. Each document located, each date verified, each transaction reconstructed. The act of building the record is also the act of becoming the woman capable of doing something with it. 40 pages in, I was no longer the woman who had been arranged. I was the woman who was arranging things herself. And I knew exactly where I intended to lay them down. July arrived in Oakland the way it always does, without apology. The heat settled over the neighborhood like a decision, and I walked past the new condos in the morning, catching the early light in their glass sides, watching the old buildings reflected back in distorted form, and I thought about how things can appear to coexist when one is slowly consuming the other. I thought about that a lot during those weeks. I kept pretending. This is the part of the story that no one talks about enough. The performance phase, the sustained act of normalcy while you are quietly building something that will end normalcy forever. I attended my cousin's birthday dinner. I sent a card to Aunt B. I responded to Renee's texts with the warmth I had always offered, and I noticed something strange in myself while doing it. The warmth was no longer painful to produce because it was no longer real. When warmth is genuine, you give it carelessly. When it is strategy, you measure every drop. Performing warmth for people who had written about you as an instrument? There is a cold, clean precision to that, and I found, to my own surprise, that I was good at it. 20 years of practice in a performance I had not known I was giving. Claudette checked on me twice a week. She brought food, collard greens, cornbread, the kind of cooking that reminds you that a body requires more than sweet tea and determination. She asked about the documentation without pressing on timelines. She understood that this kind of work is not linear. Some days I added 10 pages to the record. Some days I added a single sentence and closed the folder and quilted instead, my hands moving through the squares of the dinosaur blanket, the rhythm of it steadying something in my chest that nothing else could reach. One Sunday in late July, Renee called me. She called periodically with nothing specific to say, the way people call when they are monitoring a situation without wanting to appear to be doing so. She asked how I was sleeping. She asked about my grandchildren. Then she mentioned, very casually, that she had been going through some of Mama's old papers and had come across some things she thought we should sit down and discuss at some point. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "What kind of things?" I asked. "Oh, nothing urgent," she said. "Some estate papers, letters, things that should probably stay in the family." I said, "Of course, whenever you're ready." And then we talked about the weather for 3 minutes and hung up. She was fishing. Whether she suspected the email had been forwarded to the wrong address or was simply running routine maintenance on her control of the narrative, I could not be certain. Either way, I sat on my sofa with my heart going faster than I wanted and forced myself to breathe through it. Then I got up and did what I had been meaning to do for 3 months. The recliner had been in my living room for 4 years, since the man who left it had also left. He had occupied space in my life the way certain furniture occupies a room, large, present, never quite belonging, absorbing light without contributing any. I had kept it after he was gone because getting rid of furniture alone felt like an admission of something I was not ready to admit. I walked past it every day without looking at it directly, the way you move through space around things you have decided to ignore. I dragged it to the elevator, brought it down 4 floors to the lobby and through the front door, and set it on the sidewalk on a Tuesday morning in that Oakland summer heat. I stood beside it for a moment with my hands at my sides, looking up at the old brick face of my building, the fire escape throwing its shadow down the wall in the morning light. Then I went back upstairs. By Wednesday, it was gone. I do not know where it went, and I do not need to. What I know is that I came back to my apartment and the light in the living room was different. Literally different. The morning sun coming through the window and landing on a patch of floor I had not seen in 4 years. I stood in that light. I breathed in. That was the first thing I threw away. But it was the most important one because it was the first time I understood in my body, not in my mind, but in my actual physical body, that I got to decide what stayed in my space, what I had to look at every day, what I had to carry. Everything I did after that came from that moment of standing in the light where the chair used to be. September came with the first suggestion that the heat might relent. The shadows fell differently in the afternoon. The morning air through the fire escape had a cooler quality around the edges, the way Oakland transitions, not dramatically but gradually, the summer releasing its grip 1 degree at a time. I noticed these things because I was paying careful attention to everything that fall. When you are building toward a confrontation, you notice weather. Priscilla had filed the preliminary inquiry with the probate court in late August. The county recorder's office had confirmed that the creation metadata on the filed letter conflicted with the estate attorney's original office logs. Not yet a ruling. Not yet justice. The first official documentation in the world outside my manila envelope that said, "Something here does not add up." Priscilla was clear. The legal process moved on its own schedule. That schedule was not mine to control. But the legal process was not the only thing that mattered to me. What kept me at my kitchen table at 2 a.m. some nights, what I thought about on my morning walks before the heat rose, was the room. The specific room, the specific people in it. The moment when the record I had built with my own hands would speak in a voice that no one in that room could talk over. I called Renee in the first week of September and suggested a family gathering at the house on Magnolia Street to honor our mother's birthday. Mama would have been 79. I said I thought it would mean something to gather in her house, that we hadn't all been together since the funeral. that it was exactly the kind of thing she would have wanted. Renee agreed immediately, warmly, enthusiastically. She liked events she could organize and oversee. She liked being the person who held the family together in the home that bore her name on the deed. Of course she did. I confirmed 14 people would attend. I told Claudette, who would come as a witness, not to intervene, not to perform, just to see clearly from the beginning. I wanted one person in that room who had been watching from outside the arrangement all along. The Saturday before the gathering, I drove past Magnolia Street on my way home from the grocery store. Renee's Lincoln Navigator was parked in the driveway. That enormous burgundy red thing. The color of something trying too hard, taking up more space than it needed to. She had bought it 2 years earlier. The first time I saw it, I had thought, that is what $14 Owen dollars looks like when it has been absorbed into someone else's income, someone else's net worth, someone else's business of appearing to have more than they came by honestly. I sat at the light and looked at it, the gleam of it in the afternoon sun, the self-satisfaction it expressed without knowing how to be subtle. And I thought about the Lincoln Navigator I was going to buy for myself. Not from borrowed money, not on anyone else's timeline, on my own terms, in my own time. Then the light changed and I drove home and spread the 43 pages across my kitchen table and organized them in the order I intended to place them down. I had rehearsed nothing. I had arranged everything. That night I sat with my sweet tea and went through the document stack one final time. The email chain, printed and stapled, subject line visible. The forged letter with the metadata analysis, creation date circled in red. The bank records with the wire transfer highlighted. The county recorder's documentation with the conflicting timestamp and Priscilla's inquiry number. Each one handled. Each one placed. Each one knowing exactly where it would land. I thought about my mother. I thought about the church fan and what she said. Keep cool in body and steady in mind. I thought about the pearl earrings she wore every Christmas Sunday and the quilt frame that came from Alabama. She had trusted her family with her legacy, and her family had revised it to suit themselves. I was going to walk into that house and stand in my mother's living room and say her real wishes out loud in front of every person who had ever been told the revised version. I went to bed at a decent hour for the first time in months, and I slept. The day arrived the way all consequential days arrive, ordinary on its surface. The October sky was doing what October skies do in Oakland. Gold-edged, clear, entirely unaware of what was about to happen beneath it. I dressed carefully, not to impress anyone. I was not there to perform. I wore the golden mustard sweater because the mornings were finally cool enough for it, and because it felt like autumn and arriving. The particular warmth you put on when you know a day has been coming for a very long time. I took my pills. I put the manila envelope under my arm. I drove to Magnolia Street. 14 people were already there when I arrived. Renee had set the food out beautifully on my mother's table settings. The good plates from the china cabinet that should have been part of my inheritance and were instead being used to dress a stage. Gerald stood near the kitchen door with a glass of water, and the smile he kept in his back pocket for occasions when ease needed performing. Aunt Bee sat in the armchair by the window and waved at me with both hands, enthusiastically. The way you wave when you believe you have nothing to fear. I hugged her. I smiled. I set the manila envelope on the side table near the front door. I ate. I spoke to cousins I had not seen since the funeral. I held Renee's youngest grandchild on my hip for a few minutes and felt the weight of that small person and thought, every child in this family deserves to know who built what, and who held and who kept warm the connections that other people were quietly dismantling. Then I put her down gently and straightened up. When the food was cleared and people had settled into their conversations, I stood up. I want to share something with all of you, I said. In honor of Mama's birthday, I thought it was time we all understood her wishes, her real ones. The room went quiet in a particular way. the way of people who have just understood that the script has changed and nobody gave them the new pages. I picked up the manila envelope and walked to the coffee table in the center of the room, and I began to lay the documents down. The email chain first, printed, stapled, the subject line visible at the top. I said, "Renee accidentally sent me this in March. 17 messages, 4 years of coordination." I watched Renee's face. She did not move. The forged letter next, printed with the metadata analysis my nephew had helped me prepare, the creation date circled in red ink. I said, "This was filed with the probate court as evidence of my mother's wishes. It was created 6 weeks after she died." Aunt B covered her mouth with both hands. The bank records, the wire transfer highlighted, dated, no corresponding loan documentation, no acknowledgement. I said, $14,000, wired in good faith, never put in writing. The county recorder's confirmation, conflicting timestamps, inquiry number, Priscilla's name. I said, "This is already in front of the court." Each document placed deliberately, one at a time, in the silence of a room full of people watching 20 years of a story come apart at its seams. And then I looked up at Renee. She sat in the chair with the good armrests, in the house that bore her name on a deed built on a forged letter, and the color was leaving her face the way I had imagined it leaving her face for months. Slow, inevitable, leaving nothing behind. I said, "You told me I would always be second, but it turns out, in the only record that matters, my name was first." You could hear the October birds outside the window. You could hear the refrigerator cycling on in the kitchen. 14 people in a room, and not one of them breathed. I said, "Everything you built on our mother's name was built on a document manufactured 6 weeks after she was gone." The paper lied. And now everyone in this room knows it. Then I said the thing I had been carrying since a restaurant table with a white tablecloth, since a woman I loved leaned across the space between us and told me my place. You cannot use someone's silence as a foundation. It shifts. Eventually, it goes. Gerald left before I finished. The door closed behind him and no one acknowledged the sound of it. Aunt B was weeping. 3 cousins sat with the particular stillness of people reorganizing their entire understanding of the last 4 years simultaneously. Renee, who had delivered her verdict at that restaurant table without flinching 20 years ago, sat in front of 14 people whose opinions she had been managing for 20 years, and she said nothing. Because there was nothing to say. The record was on the table. The record spoke for itself. And the woman who had counted on my silence to keep the record out of sight had forgotten, in all her careful planning, one essential thing. I had been taking excellent notes. The civil process took 8 more months. I want to be honest with you about this, because there is a version of this story where the confrontation on Magnolia Street was the moment justice arrived complete and sufficient, and that version is not true. What followed was slow and imperfect, and required patience of the kind I had spent decades extending toward people who never deserved it, and could finally afford to extend toward something worth the wait. Priscilla filed the full claim. There were hearings. There was a response from Renee's attorney that I read without letting it take root in me. There were settlement offers, and a final one that Priscilla said was as much as we were likely to recover given the complexity of the estate timeline. Renee was required to return $9, $200, and acknowledge the contested estate transfer in writing. The house on Magnolia Street stayed in her name. I had known this was a probable outcome. Property disputes through imperfect estate paperwork rarely resolve the way the wronged party deserves, and I had held those expectations loosely from the beginning. The house was not the point. I need you to hear this. The house was my mother's. What Renee and Gerald and Aunt B took from me was not simply a piece of property with a dollar value on the market. They took the experience of being the daughter my mother intended to honor. They took the continuity of her wishes. They took the feeling of having been seen accurately by the person who mattered most. No civil claim returns those things. No settlement figure in the world covers that cost. What the civil process gave me was documentation, the official acknowledgement that my mother's letter had been falsified, the formal record that the estate had been manipulated, the legal proof that I had not been imagining what was done to me. That mattered. It mattered enormously. It simply was not the whole story of justice. The rest of justice was familial, and it moved faster than the legal process ever could. 3 cousins stopped attending Renee's gatherings after that October afternoon. 2 called me separately in the following weeks to say things they had noticed over the years and never said aloud. One had always wondered about the estate. She said it carefully, the way you say something you have been holding for a long time. I listened without telling her what to do with it. Renee's daughter Maya, 29 years old, her grandmother's eyes, her grandmother's directness, called me from her car 2 weeks after the confrontation. She was crying before I picked up. She said, "Aunt Loretta, I didn't know the whole thing. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know." I told her I believed her. I told her she had nothing to atone for. I told her she was her grandmother's granddaughter, and I could see it every time I looked at her, and that was the truth. We have spoken every week since. Aunt B has not been invited to a family gathering since that afternoon. Gerald lost the quiet deference he had always assumed was his right, the ability to walk through family rooms as though his version of history were the agreed-upon one. Renee kept the house on Magnolia Street, but she lost the only thing she ever really wanted from any of this, the authority to define who I was. Something happened to my body that fall. I had been carrying grief in places I had not named. In the tightness across my shoulders I had attributed to age. In the headaches I managed each morning with the pills from my labeled compartments. In the quality of fatigue behind my eyes that had been there for years. When the confrontation was done and the record filed and the settlement signed, something unwound. Like a fist that had been clenched for so long it had forgotten what open felt like. I started walking every morning before the heat came up. Lake Merritt at 6:30, the light still silver on the water, my feet on the path. I lost 17 pounds between October and March without trying. I slept through the night, not every night but most. The headaches came less often. The tightness in my shoulders loosened by degrees over weeks, like a thing releasing itself on its own schedule. One morning in March, I picked up my plastic pill organizer with the days of the week and noticed I had taken everything on schedule for 37 days in a row. I held it in both hands the way I had held it on that terrible Tuesday morning, when I had read the email chain and needed something with my name on it to tell me who I was. My name was still on the lid in permanent marker, but it meant something different now. Not a life raft. A practical, ordinary, well-managed tool for a woman who takes care of herself. That is what it had always been. I had just been too exhausted to receive it that way. Claudette and I walk together twice a week now, the long loop around the lake that takes 40 minutes if you keep moving, and twice that if you stop to talk, which we usually do. She requires nothing from me. I require nothing from her. We are 2 women walking in the morning in Oakland, which is among the finest things 2 people can be for one another. I am saving money every month, set aside without drama from the income that has always been mine, and only mine. The Lincoln Navigator in burgundy red is not a wish anymore. It is a number in a savings account with a target date beside it. Deshonda, my younger sister, has a house in Sacramento with a yard and a spare room, and a standing invitation she has renewed every single time we have spoken since the confrontation. Come closer. A house near her, where we can grow old together in the ordinary, unhurried way of sisters who have chosen each other. I am going to drive there in that Navigator. I am going to park it in her driveway and walk up to her door and stay. My mother's church fan still sits on my windowsill. Some evenings in the last warmth of fall, I pick it up and fan myself slow in the kitchen light and talk to her. The conversations are different now. I am telling her things instead of asking. I am saying, I built the record. I walked into that room. I said your name the way you deserve to have it said, with the full weight of everything true behind it, in front of everyone who had been given the other version. I think she already knew I would. I think she has been waiting. March came back around, and with it the first real rain of the year. Not summer heat pressing down without apology. Not that heavy. Insistent warmth that makes even the middle of the night feel unresolved. The clean, distinct cold of early spring in Oakland. The kind that makes you want to close the window and feel the particular comfort of being inside something built to hold you. I was inside something built to hold me. My apartment, my kitchen, my life. All of them felt different than they had in that summer, when I could not sleep, and cleaned the refrigerator at 2:14 in the morning, and stood at the window with my sweet tea feeling the first cold edge of something I could not yet name. A full year had passed since the email arrived. 8 months since the confrontation on Magnolia Street. 4 months since the civil settlement was finalized. The manila envelope was filed in a labeled folder in my cabinet. I no longer carried it everywhere. The proof had done its work. I had done mine. I want to talk to you directly now, clearly, without the frame of the story around it. Because someone listening to this right now may be inside a situation like mine, or they may be watching it happen to someone they love. Or they may have already been through it and never found the language for what happened to them. I want to give you that language. The system, in my experience, does not move quickly for people like me. Elder financial abuse. And that is what this was, even though no one in my family would have used those words. Even though I would not have used them for years, is underreported, underprosecuted, and undertreated by the institutions designed to address it. Probate courts are slow. Legal aid resources are stretched. Civil claims against family members are complicated by emotional testimony that muddies documentary evidence and by the cultural weight of family loyalty that makes people hesitate to pursue them at all. If you are waiting for an institution to step in and correct the record first, that wait may be very long. It may end without the outcome you deserve. This is the reality of a system that often fails the people it is supposed to protect, and I will not lie to you about it to make the story neater. What I found, and what I want to leave with you. You do not need the institution to move first. What you need is documentation so thorough, so time-stamped, so cross-referenced that when the institution does engage, it cannot look away. Keep the texts. Save the voicemails. Request bank statements. Get copies of filed documents from the county recorder's office. Talk to a legal aid attorney before you say a single word to the family member. And find your Claudette, the person with no stake in the outcome, the person who will look at what was done to you and name it without flinching, not because they love you and want to soften the truth, but because they see you clearly and have nothing to protect. Listen to what they tell you. You build your record. You find your witnesses. And then you walk your truth into the room where the people who shaped your silence are sitting. Not for them. They will not give you what you're looking for. You walk in for yourself. You walk in for the person you were before you were arranged. A 2014 study showed that almost 4 in 10 seniors have experienced verbal abuse. You'll always be second is what verbal abuse sounds like when it arrives in good clothing, at a restaurant table, from someone whose approval you have spent your whole life trying to earn. It sounds refined. It sounds like family honesty. It sounds like something you should absorb and file away and never speak about, because the person who said it is family and family gets a different accounting. It does not sound like what it is. A calculated statement designed to keep you below the waterline, to keep you doubting your own standing, to ensure that when the decisions get made, you are already convinced you have no claim. I carried that sentence inside me for 20 years and called it a memory. I should have called it what it was. And research reveals that only 1 in 24 cases of elder abuse is ever reported. 1 in 24, which means 23 other women, 23 other people of every description who are being managed, diminished, and financially stripped by people close enough to access their lives, are sitting with what they know and not walking into the room. Not because the evidence does not exist, not because they do not understand what happened, but because they have been carefully arranged, over years, by people who love them just enough to make the extraction feel like family, who have convinced them that more patience, more sacrifice, more grace will eventually correct the equation. It never does. The equation corrects when you stop paying into it. What corrects it? Documentation, witnesses, and the specific kind of courage that belongs to a woman who decides that her mother's name, her own name, will not be used as the foundation of someone else's story. I am still here in Oakland. I am walking every morning around the lake before the rest of the neighborhood wakes up. The dinosaur quilt has 8 squares left, and when I finish it, I will fold it and wrap it and drive it to my grandchild who loves dinosaurs. And I will tell him that I made every single square from something that meant something. I am watching my savings account grow steadily in the direction of a Lincoln Navigator and a house in Sacramento near Deshonda, who calls me every Sunday morning and says, "Come closer the way our mother used to say it." Like she means it. Like there is room for me. Like second was never actually my place. The church fan with Martin Luther King's face on it still sits on my windowsill. Some mornings, in the cool of early spring, I pick it up and hold it in both hands and feel my mother's fingerprints in the folds of the paper, and I think about what she would say if she could see everything that happened. I think she would say, "You always knew your name. You just had to stop letting someone else erase it." Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me in the comments because I read every single one. Where are you listening from today? And if you have ever been the dependable one, the one who absorbed the disappointment, the one whose silence was counted on, the one who believed that one more sacrifice would finally tip the scale, what would you have done walking into that room with the documents in your hands? Tell me. I want to know. If this story moved something in you, leave a like. It costs you nothing and it tells me you are here, and that matters more than you know. If you know someone living inside a silence like the one I described, someone who has been arranged against their own interests and does not yet know how to name it, please share this story with them today. It may be the thing that helps them pick up the pen and start writing it down. Subscribe and come back. There are more stories like this one. More women who documented and endured and stood up in the room they were supposed to be afraid of. I will be here to tell every single one of them.